Welcome to Season 4 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to conversations with people from around the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today, I'm joined by the fabulous Jackie Acho, who is president of the Acho Group, a consulting firm focused on empathy-centered cultural transformation in unexpected places, including the Cleveland Police. She speaks regularly about the personal, organizational, and societal value of empathy, including a TEDx talk called A Good Day's Work Requires Empathy. In 2020, she published her first book, The Currency of Empathy, and I'll make sure to have links to both of those below. All that said, empathy wasn't her professional starting point. Innovation was. Jackie received her PhD in inorganic chemistry from MIT, and after that, she became a partner at McKinsey & Company, working with a wide variety of clients on strategy, growth, innovation, and technology commercialization. Jackie remembered empathy when she had children, realizing it was the missing link to innovation, inclusion, and sustainable prosperity. Welcome to the show, Jackie. I'm thrilled to have you.
I'm so happy to be here, Anita. It's nice to be with you.
And this is a warm conversation because I just got to say right from the get-go to all the listeners and watchers, we just spent more than 45 minutes chatting pre-call, and I still can't wait to have this conversation. Can't get enough of you and your energy, Jackie. So let's start with the big one. Why did you wake up to the value of empathy?
So I had been doing innovation work in science and in business for, about 20 years before I had children. And I was a partner in large consulting firm flying all over the world. I had a corner office. I, was sort of living the lean in career girl life. And we were blessed to get pregnant. And I was a little older by the time I got pregnant. I was 34 when I had my first child, 36 when I had my second. And after I had this baby, something in me started to shift. And I remember going back to work after my maternity leave and sitting in a meeting and thinking, oh my goodness, there's so much nonsense going on. They're talking about nothing too much of the time. And now for the first time, I realized the opportunity cost of my time. And so I really started focusing my work much more in order to be efficient, in order to get home to be with the baby. Because for the baby, I was irreplaceable. In business, I felt like I was good at what I did. My clients thought I was good at what I did, but I wasn't irreplaceable. But still, I loved working and I didn't want to not do that, right? So, but there really were, it felt like kind of stark choices back then. So this was the early 2000s. Sheryl Sandberg was telling women to lean in, and I have a fabulous husband who, did co-parent. However, he also had a very demanding career. And so our choices really, when it came down to it, were outsource the children and continue on exactly the same tracks we were, or, figure out a way to work around raising these kids. And long story short, after I had my second baby, I realized that the kind of work that I loved doing was projectizable and I could take it off on my own. So I started my own business. And it was a consulting firm that did strategy and leadership work. And I ended up being able to choose the kinds of clients that I wanted to work with. And I started working with not just for-profit clients, but also not-for-profit clients that were doing really special things. And as I look back on it now, I can identify these are people who had some empathy. In part, I worked with these people because I admired them as working parents, as people who were doing good in the world and also, doing what they needed to do to take care of themselves and their children and their homes or their parents or their community or their friends. And so I really started to shift. And there was a moment where I had started to shift, but to be honest, I was a workaholic. I mean, it was my drug. And I love it. I love intellectual pursuits. I love work. I love feeling productive. And so I was still working a lot, and I was getting dressed for a client meeting, and my daughter was probably 3 at the time, and she was throwing a tantrum in the closet. And I had left, the firm. I had started my own business. I felt like I had given up a lot. I hadn't yet realized all the gifts in that, being an entrepreneur, but I fell to my knees and like tears rolling down my face. She's saying, "Why do you need to go to work again?" And I was thinking and saying, "I've changed everything. What do you want from me?" And she basically said, "I'm okay if you're gone a day a week, and I'm not okay if you're gone more." And I thought, that's ridiculous. I mean, I had been working 100 hours a week most of my adult life. And even though I had backed down to part-time at McKinsey, part-time is still a very full-time job. So I really started calculating, okay, well, she was in preschool. What if I worked during the hours she's in school, during the hours she has a nap? What if I work after she goes to bed? And then all day Friday, it would feel like one day a week. And could I get enough time in there? And I decided to try. And I also pulled on my husband to be home more. And so we sort of shifted and started working around really being there to hands-on care for our kids. I did have a fabulous woman. I don't have family in town that took care of my kids, but I had a fabulous one who helped. And so she would come and take care of the kids all day Friday, so that I would have a full day to do meetings and everything I wanted to do. But that's how we did it until the kids got to school. And the real benefit of that, which I realized later, was that I was growing my empathy muscles, because research has shown that parenting grows empathy in the brain. So this was not in my vocabulary and was not on my mind until around 2008, when I picked up Simon Baron-Cohen's book called The Science of Evil on Empathy and the Origins of Cruelty. And because he's a neuroscientist and I really love science, it solidified this soft subject to something that I had known all my life, but hadn't been able to understand and articulate and leverage as a superpower. And so I realized that that's what happened, that I had remembered. I actually was a very empathetic kid. And for different reasons, I've had different genetic analyses done. And it turns out there's an empathy gene, and I have 2 variants. So I actually am genetically predisposed to high empathy. But I had kind of stuffed it, as we're told to do. Like in leadership, you're supposed to be all these things that are usually not empathetic. And at least that's what we used to think. And so, in science, I wanted to be rational and logical. And then in business, I wanted to be tough and, all that. So the kids helped me remember that I actually had this superpower capability that once I started to leverage it, really great things happened.
So, okay, you took this book and it illuminated for you, wow, the power of empathy, which you'd been living with your kids. And then you wrote a book. Now, what inspired you to write the book? What's the book about?
So I woke up to empathy about 2008, and then I started reading voraciously. So Age of Empathy, Franz de Waal was another favorite. I mean, there's just a whole litany. I'm sure you've read them all too. And the more I read, the more I realized that empathy, oh my God, Jeremy Rifkin, The Empathic Civilization, right? He was ahead of his time. So there's all these different contributions to the way that we look at empathy: economics, neuroscience, primatology, all these different ways, right? And so I started to realize that the work that I was doing in innovation and strategy with clients was more successful in organizations that had a certain something, had a certain relational currency that I hadn't put my finger on yet. But between 2008 and 2014, when I gave the TEDx talk, I started thinking, well, it's something to do with empathy. It's something to do with empathy. And so, and it's something to do with the empathy of the leader, something to do with the currency in the organizational systems and processes. And so I really started to kind of define that for myself. And the more I got asked to speak about women in leadership, because I had been a McKinsey partner, yada, yada, the more I started getting really honest about what really is the superpower of leadership, which in my mind started to become really about empathy, about this sort of combination of, having not just sort of your own intellect and processing power, but the ability to collaborate and synthesize views across everyone, because then you end up with much better inclusive answers and much more innovative answers. So all of that was happening and brewing. And the more I spoke about it, the clearer it got. And then in 2012, 14, I got invited to give a TEDx talk. And so then I started, with every talk, it sort of crystallized a little more. And that's when I realized, wait, work requires empathy. This is why so many organizations are painful. And this is why it's actually been hard for me to consult sometimes. I walk into most organizations and I do feel a certain hurt. And part of the benefit I think I've brought all these years is kind of gluing people together in a little safe space where we can do innovation. And but then if they don't have the currency in the organization to keep it up, it doesn't flourish the way that we planned for it to. But in some cases it did. So that's when I started blogging. So 2008, I started blogging. The blog's called The Currency of Empathy. And I put those two words together very deliberately, because currency is usually focused on in the absence of humanity or empathy. And truly, they need to be together for sustainable profitability. So I really started to see clearly from all the McKinsey experience, all the scientific experience, that there wasn't a lot of juice left in the orange of, a stock market that was overvalued, of companies that were cutting in order to, look like they were creating value, companies that were gobbling up other small innovative firms because they themselves couldn't innovate because the relational currency wasn't there, but then destroying the value because so much M&A, ends up destroying value. So I thought, wow, this is really valuable. I've got to get people to see this. So that's when I started blogging. And then I started actually connected with a consulting partner. Her name is Monica Tanase-Coles. She's also ex-McKinsey, PhD physics. She was blogging about empathy. She was working with Ashoka at the time, social entrepreneurship organization. She invited me to come give a talk about entrepreneurship, which if I were to put a name to kind of where I've focused my career, it's entrepreneurship in big systems to make change. So entrepreneurship. So I went down and I did that. And pretty soon the two of us became fast friends and started developing a diagnostic that would shift organizational systems. So we started doing that work with the clients that I was working with and shifting the culture. And I started to think, if we can shift the culture, they can develop their own plans and they'll be fabulous. They don't need me to do these plans anymore, even though I love that work. Shift the culture and it's more sustainable. So I was doing that one organization at a time. I was working with leaders on their empathic capacity and what I thought leadership development really looked like, which was very different from what I'd been taught. And remember, I'm unencumbered by business school, so it allowed me to kind of be a little more irreverent, I suppose. And, really centering it all in empathy. And that felt really good for quite a long time. And it was nice balance around continuing to be there for my kids when they got off the bus and everything else. And I learned a lot. I worked with so many different clients in social justice, the police, the orchestra, Case Western Reserve University, and then quite a few for-profit clients as well, most of them in science. And so then I realized, I want to be able to affect more than the people I can touch with my work. So I wanted to write a book that could stand on its own, that people could pick up and do with what they would. And I especially wanted to write a book that integrated work and home in a way that I hadn't seen anywhere. And I guess to be honest, Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In made me mad at the time, because I thought, oh, she's coming for my daughter with the wrong message and I've got to fix this. So that was why I wrote the book.
A little lean in backlash. I get it.
I just felt like, you know what? Degenerative systems don't deserve our devotion. Our job is to change those systems. Because, I'm 52, I know how these systems are built, and I know how to deconstruct them and change them. And we can't leave that on the younger generation. So many people say, oh, I'm so optimistic about the younger generation. They're going to fix. No. It's not their job to fix our mess. We know where the bodies are buried. We got to fix it.
Yeah, well, I'm totally with you on that. I want to reflect back something that you wrote, because I always invite guests to sort of share a couple of questions that they think might animate their work, and also some of the key takeaways. And this is too beautiful not to share. So you wrote that one of your takeaways would be that shifting business practices to support empathy and humanity unleashes the human spirit, creating positive change faster than anything I've seen in 26 years of innovation work. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Well, the best way to illustrate this is the example of the Cleveland police. So, I gave this TEDx talk, and after it went live, I get a phone call out of the blue, and the guy says, "This is Detective Chris Gibbons from the Cleveland Police." And I was like, what did I do? No, I saw your TEDx talk, and I think we have an empathy problem. Can you help us? And this was, after we had had some horrific shootings here in Cleveland, and, so much had happened nationally already. And the Justice Department hadn't yet sort of descended here, and the consent decree hadn't happened. So he wasn't calling out of that. He was calling because he had seen the downstream effects of trauma on the community and on his fellow members of the police for years, and he wanted to stop it upstream. And he thought that it had to do with empathy. And I honestly, I nearly dropped the phone. I was afraid to work with the police. I watch all the videos just like everybody else. I didn't know. Long story short, Detective Gibbons is a super compelling person. Chief Williams was quite open to the idea. It took us a while to really talk about it and use the E word. But after a couple of years, we had structured a diagnostic for the Cleveland Police. And Commander Brandon Cutts, who's commands the 4th district in Cleveland. There are 5 total. The 4th is the most violent district in Cleveland, which means it's one of the most violent districts in the United States, which means it's one of the most violent districts in the world, statistically. He said, I'll try this. So we did a pilot with our Currency of Empathy diagnostic, and my partner, Monica Tanase-Coles, and I went in. We did a employee engagement survey, we called it. We didn't use the E word right off the bat, but we got hundreds of comments, lots of participation. Dozens of people said, this is my badge number, this is my phone number, I want to be involved, I want to make a change. And I came to see, it's been about 5 years we've been involved, and over those 2 years of the pilot, I came to see that, the really good officers, they do know what needs to happen, but nobody was asking them. And the system, just like most organizational systems, is degenerative because they've adopted not just business practices, but paramilitary practices that stifle any sort of humanity and entrepreneurship and inside out motivation. And at the same time can hide zero empathy behaviors like psychopathy. And in most organizations, it's not fatal. But if you carry a gun, it can turn fatal, especially because there's so much fear in the community and there's so much fear in the police. So all of that was really a recipe for the kinds of disasters that we've seen. So we go in, we do this diagnostic. Of course, it looks super ugly. We end up with a fingerprint that to us says a lot, but we don't, determine all of that. We put everything up on the wall with all the quotes and everything else, and we let them choose their priorities and start to make changes. And so this innovation team had a rolling group of members that kept changing, making priorities, and doing things that organizationally started shifting toward valuing people, honoring people, connecting with the community. We got community leaders involved in the work. And long story short, after a couple of years of this work, we resurveyed, our scores went way up, but that's not even what matters. What matters is in that district, use of force went down by 29%, citizen complaints went down by 45%, and over half of the transfer requests in the Cleveland Police Department were into the 4th district, which was unheard of. And those statistics had risen in every other district. So it was very unusual what happened. So honestly, I was kind of shocked it happened that fast, but in hindsight, it makes sense because it's in here. It's in all of us. And it's about unleashing our natural capacity. It's actually not about teaching us. It's about helping us remember. Yeah. So, and one of the things that I like to say is you can't train, a lot of organizations charge hundreds of thousands of dollars to do empathy training. It's a cognitive process. And really high cognitive empathy with a really low affective empathy is the definition of psychopathy. So you can't do that without changing the organizational systems that allow people to practice the affective or feelingful part of empathy. And that's what we did.
I love that. And, I watched a talk where you were in a community center, a community church, where you were the, what's the word when you're facilitator of this dialogue. So we're going to include the link in the description below. So for people who want to watch it, it's really, really worthwhile. Jackie, I'll switch gears with you a little bit with your permission to go on a bit of a personal journey with you now. You were diagnosed with ovarian cancer last February, and then COVID happened. So you have been battling cancer through COVID. I wonder if you could share, I think I've heard you say that you can feel the healing of power of empathy more deeply, and you can see more clearly what gets in the way of empathy thanks to this last year and the journey you've been on. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying that it helps me empathize with what too many people go through in the world and in this country, especially despite all the money we've spent on cancer research, despite all the money we spent on healthcare. There's too many of us being diagnosed with cancer, and we don't have the cancer genes that have been identified. So there needs to be some fundamental rethinking about why we're getting cancer and how to prevent it and how to treat it. And the scientific side of me is, really working that as well. From an empathy standpoint, so it definitely helped me empathize more with people who go through such vulnerability health-wise, because I'd been blessed with not worrying about my body for most of my life, really. I did, however, do a lot of work with healing my daughter. She used to get hemiplegic migraines. So that vulnerability crept into my life as a mother, which actually was even more painful than having it be myself.
Of course.
But so having this diagnosis, though, and really sitting with, frankly, the prospect of mortality was, it's just something that I could never have gotten to had I not gone through this experience. And what I found is that there are people who are capable of sitting with you in that place. And I think it has to do, the people who can do it better than other people. And when I say better, I just mean that on the receiving end, it feels nourishing. They have fewer emotional triggers. Either they've worked on them, everybody living is inherently traumatic. None of us gets out of this alive, and there are losses along the way. So, either they've worked on them, or they, perhaps had very empathetic parents who, invested in them to such an extent that they're just really emotionally centered. And one of the biggest blessings of my life is my husband is like that. And his mom is a super empathetic person. And so I have had a partner. I've never been alone on this journey. And then a handful of friends who, some of whom have gone through losing somebody to very difficult cancers. And when they first sort of engaged with me as I was going through this, I remember saying to one of them, it's so brave of you to do this, knowing all the losses you've had. And interestingly, they said back to me, well, actually, this is for me too, because you're now in a space where I can talk to you about things that people don't usually understand. And now you do, because there's just a vulnerability to realizing that we're mortal. And I tried to cognate on that prior to getting a diagnosis, but I didn't get there the way I did this past year. And there's a depth and an intimacy to having those kinds of conversations when people are able to have them.
And I'm sure everybody, the way they feel heard or the space is held for them is different from one person to another. But what do you think would be helpful for people to know when it comes to talking and holding space for somebody who's going through a really tough time, ovarian cancer, for example?
It's so great you asked that question. So actually, one of the friends, who's been so wonderful with me, she was a client for many years, and I knew she had lost her husband when they had a young baby 26 years ago, and to melanoma that went to his brain. It was just a horrible situation. I knew all of that, but we've talked about it now in such detail. We walk every Sunday over the last year, and we've just been saying, we should write a blog post called Keeping Company with Cancer, because we can help people, not that we're experts. I mean, everybody's got a different way, but at least we can share our way, and something that's been really soothing and helpful to both of us, helpful to me to not be afraid and alone all the time, because really it's being alone is what we're fundamentally afraid of. I'm not even that afraid of dying, although I don't hope it comes soon. But I didn't want to be isolated. And she was isolated in her post-trauma, actually, and not being able to share some of her feelings. So Keeping Company with Cancer, some of the things that really help, it comes down to just being with, and not trying to offload the fear or the pain that you might have as a trigger to what's happening to somebody else, by saying, be strong, stay positive, fuck cancer, or whatever your moniker might be. Find out where the person is at and engage with that. Because if it's not your experience, there's something to learn about the experience. And if you're open to it and not triggered and can sit with it, as opposed to trying to solve it, try to make it seem better, try to cheer somebody up, then you'll learn something about really about mortality and intimacy that's not available to us until we start to consider these things. So it's really about being with. And so much of what is difficult for people is that their own fear gets triggered, whether it's their fear of loss of you, their fear of their own health issue, right? So that they can't sit with you because they're still unresolved in their own health, or just sort of an existential fear of death, which we don't acknowledge or talk about as a normal part of life. And that's a societal issue.
I think what you have just shared is kind of, for me, a big reminder that although it often happens in the face of a major circumstance playing out, like even sometimes a terrible circumstance playing out, it doesn't have to be that we wait for those moments to engage in those kinds of conversations and holding space for others to share what's really deep in their hearts and on their minds. Like, if we gave more space to one another to share some of like the real things that are going on, we'd have a much richer life, a much more profound and significant life, don't you think?
Oh, I completely agree. And, there's just, it something like this puts you in a place of vulnerability that both invites the sharing and allows you to share your vulnerability in a way that's, I guess it's strange to say, but not embarrassing, right? Like, I'm fighting something that's, really tough. Nobody's going to blame me for being sad or down or afraid sometime, right? So, but American culture in particular, Western culture in particular, doesn't acknowledge death, doesn't acknowledge vulnerability. Everybody's got to win. It's a big competition. And the truth is we don't connect through our strengths. We connect through our vulnerabilities. And that's where the magic happens. And that's where we really are nourished as human beings. But that's not how we spend our time, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or at a cocktail party or anything. So it's a big cultural problem. It's a big cultural problem, but it's shiftable like that.
Yes, it is. Oh my gosh, I'm so sad to say that we're coming to the last question because this has been such a wonderful conversation. We've covered so much ground, I can't believe it. I've gotten used to asking my guests this season, and I'm so glad, and now it's going to be a forevermore, a question. If you can think of one, and it doesn't have to be from the last year, it can be from any part of your life, but where you were on the receiving end of purposeful empathy, like empathy on purpose, it was extended to you, what that felt like to you, why it stays with you, what it meant for you.
Yeah, so, I could talk on and on about, how my husband has danced with me all of our lives together, and especially in this last year. I've talked a little bit about that already, but I'm actually going to answer this question by talking about something that anybody could have access to. And it's music. So I was the beneficiary of music therapy. So being a cancer patient, so one of the bonuses of being a cancer patient at University Hospitals in Cleveland, where I started out, was that I had access to a music therapy program. And a young woman named Tori Obermeyer, who's in her 20s, but my goodness, she's like, 100 wisdom-wise. She walks into my room right after surgery, and my soul was like below the floor, like just buried. I had no idea how to reach it. She walks in the room with a guitar, and she says, would you think you might want to do some music therapy? I'm like, I don't know. And she just maybe. So she just very gently started playing and started having me talk about how I felt about what had happened to my body and what was happening and what I was facing coming up, which was 7 rounds of chemotherapy. And so it was the first moment where I started to sort of resuscitate my cowering soul, my cowering creative energy. And so she left, and I came home from the hospital. We went into lockdown. She called and she said, would you like to continue with Zoom? And I said, well, yeah, I think I would. And so about once a week we met via Zoom, and through the language of music, which I appreciate deeply. And I so wish I could sing. I can't. My daughter's an amazing singer. I can't match pitch. I've tried. I've taken lessons. But anyway, through this medium of music, she related to me and reflected to me and allowed me to unleash feelings, thoughts, ideas, and it sort of culminated in writing a song with her. So she made it really easy. It was, I played the drums, but I don't have any musical ability either, but she had tons. So what she did is she made it sort of like Mad Libs, fill in the blank, and so we took one of my favorite artists, Sarah Bareilles, and we rewrote the song, She Used to Be Mine. And we wrote it with all of my thoughts and feelings and everything I was going through, what I had gone through with the cancer and what I was afraid of, but what I was hopeful about and all of that. And And it was an expression of feeling that I couldn't have gotten to without the music. There's something about the music and the words that engages both sides of your brain and pulls you into a presence, a really healing presence that I always knew because I appreciated music and I loved to dance, but I had never experienced to that extent. And it was incredibly healing. And underneath it all, it was empathy, because what happened was when we finished the song and she played it for me and then she recorded it for me so that I could listen to it, I felt heard. I felt seen. I felt not just seen by her. I felt like she had drawn out of me an accurate mirror so that I was metabolizing my fear and not stuffing it. And in the metabolizing of the fear, you can transform it into something meaningful. It's only when you stuff it that it becomes an unconscious barrier to empathy, actually, because I think fear and empathy are in a way opposites. Empathy is the antidote to fear. So she was helping pull me through the fear. And when I played, I posted a blog about the song, and when my husband listened to it, he started crying because he knew what I'd been going through, and so how beautiful for him to have that release. And then I had some of the friends who had been closer to me on the journey, same thing, right? And so what a beautiful ethereal language above language that knitted us together in this relational currency. And it was all about empathy. It was all about empathy, and it was really purposeful. So I'm a huge fan of music therapy, art therapy. I'm just a huge fan of channeling creativity that comes from something much bigger than ourselves and through us. It's part of that relational currency.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's so beautiful. And I'm going to send you an article written by a woman named Kathleen Pavlovich in New Zealand that I also interviewed for this podcast just a couple of weeks ago. She wrote about quantum empathy. And as a scientist, you are going to love this because it so describes, I believe, what you just shared with all of us. So thank you so much. It's been delicious to chat with you. And we've spent like 90 minutes together. Sorry, audience, viewers, you only got half of that. But thanks for everything. And again, we'll have all the information about how you can get Jackie's blogs and see her TED Talk and order her book and watch all the things that she's put out on the internet below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time at Purposeful Empathy.
Thank you so much, Anita. And thank you for this work you're doing. It's just fabulous.
Well, it takes one to know one. Now, what if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your own thinking clutter, make that important decision, and liberate you from whatever is holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to select a coach of your choice anytime from anywhere. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.